Should Benjamin Sesko join Manchester United or Newcastle United? Two options are there on the table for one of Europe's most talented young players, but what is the better fit? Today we're going to analyse both situations, both offers, see what the best solution would be for the player. Before we get into this, I want to hear from you guys. Would you pick United or would you pick Newcastle if you were Benjamin Sesko? I think it's a really interesting question because you've got the history, the prestige, but the mess that is Manchester United. Or you've got the ready-to-go Newcastle, who are Champions League ready, who have a proven track record of developing young strikers into superstar talents like Alexander Isak, and quite frankly, are a much more stable option. Let me know what you would do in the comments below. This video is going to be a little bit more rambly than usual. I'm trying out something new here, so bear with me because we're going to go through first and foremost where Manchester United sit on this. Now, clearly, we've got the Athletic article up in front of us here. Manchester United have chosen Ben Sesko as the guy, as the number 9. And frankly, coming into this summer, it was pretty clear United needed a number 9. After last season's catastrophe in front of goal, Bruno Fernandes being the top goal scorer in the Premier League with just 10, Rasmus Hojlund struggling to find his feet, Joshua Zirkzee struggling to find his feet. I think every Manchester United fan really felt like the number 9 was an absolute priority this summer. And so did the club, clearly, because as you can see, Man United are prioritising a move for Benjamin Sesko. The Old Trafford club have made informal contact with their Bundesliga counterparts. There's other reports, isn't there, stating that Manchester United have sent a delegation out there, that Matt Hargreaves is leading the charge, and we've subsequently seen a report from David Ornstein that claims Benjamin Sesko will cost 75 million euros plus add-ons. We saw when he was being linked heavily to Arsenal that the agent was a little bit of a problem. He reportedly wanted 10 million euros. All of these numbers make this a very tricky proposition for Manchester United to do. Now, we all know about this, don't we? The fact that Manchester United have been tracking Benjamin Sesko since he was 16. They've wanted to sign him the last 2 or 3 summers. It's never come to fruition. But there are still big question marks about Ben Sesko's fit at Manchester United. And I think a lot of those question marks come to how United want that number 9 to work. Obviously, you've seen the links with Ollie Watkins in recent weeks, a player that really wants to run the channels, very established and senior within that Aston Villa unit. He has a record of scoring plenty of Premier League goals. In fact, he's picked up double figures of league goals every single season, going all the way back to 2015 with Exeter City. So Ollie Watkins is the established name, but Manchester United don't necessarily feel there's value in a £65 million offer to Aston Villa for a 29 going on 30-year-old Ollie Watkins. Instead, they would clearly rather spend 60, 70 million pounds on a 22-year-old that has huge upside. But as we can see with the numbers, some of the upside around Benjamin Sesko is yet to be proved out. His non-penalty expected goals standing at about the 50th percentile, not a huge number, despite the fact he has classically overperformed his XG. So is it the smartest idea to sign a 22-year-old for £70 million when you've already signed a 22-year-old for £70 million in Rasmus Hojlund, who hasn't quite worked as we sit here today? Joshua Zirkzee, who's recruited for £35 million last summer, who's still only 23 years old. Do you then double down on that and look to bring in Ben Sesko, whose game, as we can see with the data and with the eye test, his game is still fairly unrefined? You know, this is a player who scored 27 league goals across the last 2 campaigns. In the previous season to last year, 7 of his 14 came in the final 7 games. He went on an extremely hot run. And when he finds those hot runs, Ben Sesko is a real problem. He offers something quite different to Hojlund and Zirkzee, much more of an aerial threat. As you can see, his 6'5" frame helps him win a lot of aerial duels. He's in the top 4% of European strikers by that metric. And overall, parts of his game are certainly more developed than the number 9s Manchester United have on their books right now. I can think immediately of ball striking. Joshua Zirkzee wants to move between the lines a lot more than Ben Sesko, who I actually think is better when he's asked to run in behind and open his legs and play in transition, which might suit him at Manchester United. Another positive with the Manchester United move is the signings they've already made, in my opinion. And Mbeumo and Cunha, 2 Premier League ready and proven players, 2 players that have a history of scoring Premier League goals, and Mbeumo coming off the back of a 20-goal campaign. Cunha coming off the back of a 14-goal campaign as well, means there is far less pressure on the number 9 to immediately come in and hit the ground running. Last season, when you didn't have goals from Zirkzee, when you didn't have goals from Hojlund, There were no other options in the forward line scoring goals, but by adding £130 million worth of forward talent, United have gone some way to quell the pressure on the number 9. And there's no doubt that would be a big benefit to Benjamin Sesko. When you've got 35 goals behind you, you don't necessarily have to go out there and hit 20 goals immediately, like was being asked of a player like Rasmus Hojlund, and immediately adding bucket loads of pressure that's already there because you're Manchester United's number 9, and the shirt itself is inherently heavy because of the star quality that's played in it in the past. It also feels like if Benjamin Sesko is to join Manchester United, there might well be an exit for a player like Rasmus Hojlund. You know, we're seeing reports today by Adam Crafton and interviews with Rasmus Hojlund that he clearly wants to stay at the club. Here he is speaking after the Manchester United win against Bournemouth, saying, "I think my plan is very clear for me to stay and fight for my spot whatever happens." So he doesn't necessarily want to leave the club. He's on a long contract. It's going to be very difficult to force him out if he doesn't want to leave. And he's well within his rights to stay. You know, he's a boyhood Manchester United fan. He's coming off the back of a poor season, yes, but he backs himself to an extremely high level to hit the ground running here and score goals in this number 9 spot with Cunha and Mbeumo alongside him. You know, many of the points I was making about Sesko having less pressure next season if he was to join Manchester United because of Mbeumo and Cunha are the same points you could make for Hojlund. Hojlund would not have as much pressure next season on him with goal scorers playing around him. So I don't think it's going to be easy, and people online are talking about swap deals. I don't think that's going to be easy to do if Hojlund wants to stay at the club, which he's well within his rights to. So what about Newcastle United? Well, let's start with the finances, and clearly they are able to afford the fee to some level. Whether or not that involves Alexander Isak, we'll talk about in a little bit. The wages might be more of a sticking issue. He obviously is going to want a decent wage, and the agent fee is going to be chunky. Newcastle have PSR issues. I think that's a totally separate conversation. But let's pretend they can afford the financial package that Ben Sesko wants. Would they be a better fit or a worse fit? Well, I don't think you can answer that question without talking about Alexander Isak. Is he going to be at the club next season? If he's going to be at the club, I'm not too sure how I see Sesko and Isak coexisting. Now, clearly that was a plan from Eddie Howe and Newcastle because, you know, they wanted to recruit Ugo Ekitike to play up alongside Alexander Isak. So to some level, there must be some form of structure or tactical plan that could involve a front two and wouldn't mean that Ekitike was going to be benched for 90% of the season by Isak. And likewise, Sesko wouldn't be benched for 95% of the season by Isak. And I can imagine some people already at home will be saying, well, Isak's injury record's so checkered. I mean, it is, but last season, 34 starts in the Premier League in 38 games. There's only been one season of his professional career where he's dropped below 30 appearances in a single campaign. So I think it's a big question mark as to whether or not Alexander Isak could coexist with another superstar priced striker like an Ekitike or a Sesko. And the answer to that question mark, frankly, might be taken out of their hands, because if Alexander Isak doesn't return to training and does force through a move to Liverpool, they're going to need a number 9. And it does feel like the natural pathway for Sesko is much clearer at Newcastle than it is at Manchester United. Sure, they might not have the history and the prestige of Manchester United, but the team is far more tactically settled. They're coming off the back of an excellent Carabao Cup win, and the trajectory of the club, despite the catastrophic summer they've suffered so far, is clearly on the up. And when I speak about Eddie Howe's tactical system, the idea of delivery from wide, counter-pressing, playing in much wider spaces than other Premier League teams, much more transitional than other Premier League teams with their pace and their power, I really think that suits Benjamin Sesko's game, and a lot of the best qualities will be brought out of him by a coach like Eddie Howe, whose game style is based on finding plenty of balls into the number 9, both in the air and on the floor, and getting that number 9 in excellent areas. It's one of the reasons Alexander Isak's game's gone to a whole new level. 24 Premier League goals really shows you that the number 9 in that Newcastle side is the focal point. Things go through him. The wide men look to deliver early. The fullbacks look to deliver early. Bruno G is looking to play balls over the top. And I just think overall the suitability of Ben Sesko to that system is excellent. However, I do think as good as the tactical fit is, you've got to take into account how well it's being sold off the pitch. Newcastle this summer have struggled to sell the project. It's a fact you cannot get away from, be it Liam Delap, João Pedro, Mbeumo, Cunha, James Trafford. When teams of a higher pedigree have come to the table with bigger wages, yes, but also with a project plan, Newcastle have struggled to compete, and I think that does come down to the fact the sporting director issue has hung around all summer like a bad smell. Darren Eales still hasn't been replaced as the CEO. Off the field, the Newcastle situation feels quite tumultuous, and if you're a new player looking at a project being presented, you want that to be smooth and clean. The other factor you've got to take into account at Newcastle is you look at the players that are there and they are exciting, but Alexander Isak wants to leave, so you wouldn't be playing alongside him. Bruno G, who I think is probably the other superstar of this side, his contract's up in 2028. We've seen no sign of him agreeing to a new deal. So you would want guarantees that these players are going to be kept and maintained and you can play alongside the best of the best. Because, frankly, you would also be looking at the players they've missed out on and saying, well, if these players didn't want to join, why didn't they want to join? And if I join, who's joining with me that takes us to the next level? I'm sure Benjamin Sesko will be thinking that very clearly. So let's make a decision. Would you join Manchester United or Newcastle if you were Benjamin Sesko? I'll be honest with you. I think the real progression within his career would potentially come at Newcastle. I think the fit tactically is excellent. The minutes would for sure be there. Yes, he would have to take a step back on his wages, but they've proven, as they have with Alexander Isak, they can take players to the next level. It would open the door for the Champions League as well. And me as a Manchester United fan, I think you have to accept the fact that United have taken players like Ben Sesko in the past, Rasmus Hojlund being a prime example, and have not been able to take them to the next level. In fact, in recent years, Manchester United has really been a graveyard of talent, and it would be very difficult to ignore that if I was Benjamin Sesko. For that reason, I think if I was Sesko, I would go to Newcastle. I'm really interested to hear what you guys would do, and I'm sure there's arguments to be made on both sides of the fence. You can totally see why he would end up at Manchester United, given the pedigree and the heritage of the club, and I'm not saying that would be a bad move. I think it could potentially be an excellent transfer if we see Amorim Ball continue on the trajectory of pre-season. But it's a big risk when Newcastle is a very stable option, despite the fact they're losing players. I don't know, man. This is a really tough call, and it's a huge career decision for a player who, has to get it right. He really has to get this decision right, because his career could go to superstar status.